Theo Aldridge stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, staring down at the city that had made him a millionaire. The glittering skyline of San Francisco stretched endlessly before him. Luxury high-rises, shimmering lights, and the endless hum of a world that never stopped moving. Somewhere beneath it all, people rushed to expensive dinners, closed multi-million-dollar deals, and chased dreams built on power and prestige. He should have felt satisfied. He had everything: wealth, influence, and the kind of success that made headlines. But instead, a strange emptiness sat in his chest, growing heavier with each passing year. A soft chime broke through his thoughts. "Theo, we're waiting." He turned to find his father, Richard Aldridge, standing at the head of the grand dining table, where a small group of investors and executives sipped on vintage wine, their laughter polite and calculated. Richard's eyes held that familiar expectation. Show them who you are. Prove you belong. Theo slid into his seat, offering a practiced smile as conversation resumed. The topic was familiar: expansions, acquisitions, new developments set to reshape the city. He could predict every question, every reaction, every power play. It was a game he had mastered, yet one that left him feeling like an actor in someone else's script. Across from him, Zoe Sinclair flashed him a knowing smile. She was stunning, poised, every inch the perfect match in the eyes of the elite. "You've been quiet tonight," she mused, swirling the wine in her glass. "Just listening," Theo replied smoothly. "That's new," she teased. "Usually, you're the one leading the conversation." She was fishing. He knew Zoe well enough to recognize when she was looking for reassurance, trying to gauge where she stood in his world. His father jumped in before he could respond. "Theo has a lot on his mind. Big decisions ahead. A man like him can't afford distractions." Zoe's smile remained, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. "Then I suppose I should feel honored to have his attention at all." A chuckle rippled through the table, but Theo barely heard it. He pushed back his chair. "Excuse me." Without waiting for a reply, he walked toward the balcony, needing air. The moment he stepped outside, the cold breeze hit him, sharp against his skin. The city stretched below, endless, vibrant, yet completely disconnected from him. What did it mean to have everything when nothing felt real? His wealth determined every interaction, shaped every relationship. People saw his name before they saw him. The invitations, the admiration, even the interest in his personal life. It all came with conditions. His mind flashed back to something he had read earlier that day, a news article about the increasing homelessness crisis in San Francisco. Families living in shelters, people losing everything overnight, a different world, one he had never truly seen. His father's voice cut through the night. "You're acting strange." Theo didn't turn. "Am I?" Richard stepped beside him, gaze fixed on the city. "I know that look. You're questioning everything again." "Maybe because it deserves to be questioned." Richard sighed. "You built something incredible, Theo. You're a leader. But you need to stop searching for meaning in places that don't matter." Theo let out a quiet laugh. "That's the problem, isn't it? What if I don't know what matters anymore?" Richard stiffened. "That's nonsense. You have wealth, respect, power. You could have a future with Zoe, build something even bigger. This uncertainty is a waste of time." Theo turned to face him. "What if I told you I needed to step away from it all?" His father's expression darkened. "Step away? From what?" "Everything. The company. The meetings. This." He gestured toward the lavish space behind them. "I need to understand what it's like to exist without all of it." A beat of silence. Then Richard let out a humorless chuckle. "You can't be serious." "I am." "And what exactly do you plan to do?" Theo met his father's gaze. "Disappear, for a month. Live as someone else. See the city. Not from boardrooms and penthouses, but from the ground." Richard stared at him, a mixture of disbelief and irritation flashing in his eyes. You want to play poor for a month? What? Sleep on benches for fun? This is absurd, Theo. What could you possibly learn? I don't know, Theo admitted. But that's the point. Richard scoffed. This is reckless and childish. You have responsibilities, people relying on you. You can't just vanish. Why not? Because you're Theo Aldridge. Theo let the words sink in. His name, his wealth, the identity that had been built for him. But who was he without it? Maybe that's exactly why I have to do this. Richard exhaled sharply. And what happens when you come back? Do you expect the world to wait for you? Theo's voice was steady. I don't expect anything. Richard shook his head, frustration laced in his features. Fine. If you want to throw yourself into some ridiculous social experiment, do it. But don't expect me to indulge whatever existential crisis you're having. Theo didn't respond. He had already made up his mind. As the evening went on, he played the part expected of him. But his decision was set. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, he pulled out a duffel bag. No designer clothes, no sleek watches, just worn-out jeans, a faded hoodie, an old pair of sneakers, his credit cards, left behind, his phone, powered down. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. This was the moment he stepped into a world where his name meant nothing. Taking one last look at the life he had built, Theo Aldridge walked out the door. The wind hit differently down here, sharp, cold, biting in a way Theo had never truly noticed before. He adjusted the worn-out hoodie over his head as he walked through the dimly lit streets of San Francisco's Tenderloin district. The sidewalks, cracked and stained with years of neglect, were lined with makeshift tents and sleeping bags. People huddled beneath awnings, their faces weathered, their eyes guarded. The weight of his backpack, a cheap second-hand bag he'd picked up that morning, felt heavier than it should. Maybe because, for the first time in his life, everything he owned fit inside it. This was his first night as Noah Allen. His steps slowed as he reached a small alley, where a cluster of people had gathered around a rusted fire barrel. The glow cast flickering shadows on their faces, their quiet conversations blending with the distant hum of traffic. A man sitting on an overturned crate glanced up. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He was bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, despite everything. You lost. The man's voice was low, steady. Theo shook his head. No. The man let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, you are. Theo hesitated. He had expected suspicion, maybe indifference. But this man, he sounded like he had seen this before. I'm new around here, Theo admitted. The man studied him for a moment before nodding toward the empty spot near the fire. Then sit. No one trusts a guy who just stands around looking nervous. Theo hesitated, but eventually lowered himself onto the curb. The warmth from the fire was immediate, a small comfort against the night chill. The man leaned back against the brick wall. Name's Ollie. Theo glanced at him. Noah. Ollie arched an eyebrow. That your real name? Theo swallowed. Yeah. Ollie smirked but didn't push. The next few minutes passed in silence. People spoke in murmurs, keeping their conversations close. Every now and then, someone new would step up to the fire, warm their hands, then disappear into the night. Theo listened, observed. This world moved differently. There was no rush, no pretense, no business cards exchanged, just quiet survival. Ollie finally broke the silence. You don't belong here. Theo stiffened. Why do you say that? You carry yourself different. You look people in the eye. Most guys down here stopped doing that a long time ago. Theo exhaled, turning his gaze to the fire. I'm just trying to figure some things out. Ollie chuckled. Aren't we all? Before Theo could respond, a voice cut through the night. You're in my spot. Theo turned to see a man standing a few feet away, mid-30s, tall, wiry, his clothes layered but tattered. His expression was hard, his stance tense. Ollie sighed. Relax, man, there's plenty of curb. The man didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on Theo, waiting. Theo could feel the silent pressure of the moment. The test. Slowly, he stood. Didn't know it was taken. The man huffed, but gave a slight nod before taking Theo's place on the curb. Ollie let out a breath. Lesson 1, kid. Everything down here is claimed. You just don't always see the borders. Theo took a step back, his heart still pounding slightly. Noted. Ollie tilted his head toward the street. Come on. Let me show you where you can actually sleep without getting kicked out by morning. Theo followed, his mind racing. This wasn't just about blending in. It was about learning the unspoken rules, the silent codes that governed life here. They walked for several blocks, passing dimly lit storefronts and empty bus stops. Eventually, they reached a side street where a small group of people had set up near the wall of an old building. Golden Haven, Ollie said, nodding toward a sign barely visible in the darkness. Shelter opens at dawn. If you're lucky, you get a cot. If not, at least you get food. Theo looked up at the sign. Golden Haven. The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. He had seen it in the article he read before leaving his old life. A non-profit working to transition people off the streets. And then he saw her. A woman stood just outside the shelter's entrance, arms crossed, talking to someone in a low but firm voice. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and even in the low light, there was something striking about her presence. That's Emma, Ollie muttered. She runs things around here. Got a backbone tougher than most guys I know. Theo watched as Emma finished speaking to a man, then turned, walking toward the front steps. She was about to disappear inside when she suddenly stopped. Her gaze landed on him. For a second, neither of them moved. Then, curiosity flickered across her expression. You're new, she said. Theo swallowed, nodding. Yeah. Emma stepped closer, her eyes scanning him. Not in a judgmental way, but like she was trying to figure him out. Have you eaten? She asked. He hesitated, caught off guard. I'm fine. Emma didn't look convinced. The kitchen's still open if you change your mind. Theo nodded, but before he could say anything, she turned and walked inside. Ollie smirked beside him. She's got a good read on people. If she noticed you, you'll be on her radar. Theo glanced at the door where she disappeared. For the first time since stepping into this world, he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Theo sat on the curb outside Golden Haven, watching as the city slowly stirred awake. The early morning air carried a damp chill, the kind that settled deep into your bones and refused to leave. He pulled his hoodie tighter, his fingers stiff from the cold. The night had been long, uncomfortable, and riddled with unfamiliar sounds. Shuffling footsteps, distant sirens, the quiet murmurs of people trying to find sleep on hard concrete. He had barely rested. Around him, others were beginning to wake as well. A man 2 feet away stretched his arms with a heavy sigh, while an older woman carefully folded a thin blanket, packing it into a worn-out shopping cart. The routine was practiced, efficient, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The door to the shelter creaked open. Emma stepped out, coffee cup in hand, her expression unreadable. For a moment she stood there, scanning the people in front of the shelter, before her gaze settled on him. You look like hell, she said. Theo smirked, rubbing his face. Rough night. She took a slow sip of her coffee. First time sleeping outside? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Her eyes flickered with something, curiosity maybe, or recognition. She had seen enough new faces to know when someone didn't belong, but she didn't press. Instead, she exhaled, tilting her head toward the door. We've got breakfast inside if you're hungry. Theo hesitated. He had spent years controlling every aspect of his life. What he ate, where he stayed, who he associated with. Accepting help wasn't just foreign, it was uncomfortable. "I'm good," he said. Emma's lips pressed together. "Suit yourself." She turned to leave, but then stopped. "You got a name?" A beat passed before he answered. "Noah." She nodded, studying him for a second longer, then disappeared inside. Ollie chuckled beside him. "Told you she'd have you on her radar." Theo glanced at him. "She always like that?" "Like what?" "Direct." Ollie grinned. "Emma doesn't have time for games. She sees things the way they are. You're either real or you're not." Theo exhaled, glancing back toward the shelter doors. He wasn't sure which category he fell into anymore. By late morning, the crowd in front of Golden Haven had thinned. Some had gone inside to eat, others had left in search of work or shelter elsewhere. Theo lingered, watching as Emma moved between volunteers, organizing supplies, checking in with those who came through the doors. There was something about the way she carried herself. Efficient, purposeful, but never cold. He wasn't the only one watching. A man in a grey beanie leaned against the wall near the entrance, arms crossed, gaze fixed on Emma as she spoke with an older woman. His stance was relaxed, but there was something about the way he watched her that put Theo on edge. "Who's that?" Theo asked quietly. Ollie followed his gaze. "Ryan." "Her boyfriend." Ollie let out a sharp laugh. "Not even close. That's her brother." Theo raised an eyebrow. "He doesn't like strangers," Ollie added, "especially ones hanging around Emma." Theo barely had time to process that before Ryan pushed off the wall and walked straight toward them. "You knew." Ryan's voice was level but firm. Theo met his gaze. "Yeah." Ryan studied him. "Where'd you come from?" "Around." Ryan didn't blink. "That's supposed to mean something?" Ollie cut in, voice casual. "Relax, man. He's just figuring things out." Ryan wasn't convinced. His gaze flicked to Theo's hands, then his shoes. Small details, but ones that stood out. Theo's nails weren't cracked and dirty like most people out here. His shoes, though worn, were too well made to have been on the streets for long. Theo could feel the skepticism radiating off of him. Emma's voice cut through the tension. "Ryan, give him some space." Ryan turned. "I'm just making sure he's not here to waste your time." Emma sighed, walking up to them. "Noah's fine." Ryan gave Theo one last look before stepping back. "If you say so." Theo exhaled as Ryan walked away. "Not a fan of strangers, huh?" Emma shook her head, watching her brother disappear down the street. "Not when it comes to this place." She turned back to Theo, crossing her arms. "He's not wrong, though." Theo arched an eyebrow. "About what?" "You don't seem like the type to end up here." Theo forced a smirk. "What type is that?" Emma tilted her head slightly. "The kind that's been through it. People who've lived this life don't carry themselves like you do." Theo's pulse quickened. He'd been careful, keeping his posture relaxed, avoiding the sharp confidence that usually marked his presence in a room. But Emma saw through people. "I guess I'm still adjusting," he said carefully. Emma didn't look away. "Yeah, I bet you are." For a moment there was silence. Then she exhaled. "We need an extra set of hands inside. If you're sticking around, you might as well do something useful." Theo hesitated. He had spent his life delegating, overseeing, directing, taking orders. That was a different story. But if he wanted to understand this world, if he wanted to understand her, he had to be in it. "What do you need?" A flicker of approval crossed Emma's face. "Follow me." Theo followed her inside, stepping through the doors of Golden Haven for the first time. The air inside was different, warmer, lined with the scent of fresh bread and coffee. People sat at worn tables, eating in quiet conversation. Volunteers moved between them, refilling cups, handing out plates. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a second chance for the people who came through its doors. and Theo had just stepped into the center of it. The hum of quiet conversation and the clinking of dishes filled the air inside Golden Haven. The space was simple. Long tables lined the room, mismatched chairs scattered about. A coffee station sat in the corner, where a few men hovered, nursing their cups like lifelines. The overhead lights flickered slightly, the old wiring struggling to keep up. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and warmth was a luxury out here. Theo followed Emma past the tables, weaving through volunteers who moved with practiced efficiency. He took everything in, the way people clung to their plates, as if afraid the food might disappear. The silent gratitude in their nods when a volunteer refilled a cup. "This is where we prep," Emma said, leading him into a small kitchen. Steam rose from industrial-sized pots, and the air was thick with the scent of scrambled eggs and buttered toast. A man in a faded apron stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with sharp precision. "Kinsley, this is Noah. He's helping out today," Emma said. Kinsley Hayes turned, wiping her hands on a towel. She was older, maybe in her 60s, but her presence was commanding. A deep kindness sat behind her eyes, but there was no nonsense in her demeanor. "You know how to handle a knife, kid?" she asked. Theo blinked. "Excuse me?" Kinsley let out a short laugh. "For chopping vegetables, not for anything dramatic." He glanced at the cutting board in front of her, where half a bell pepper lay in uneven slices. He could analyze market trends, negotiate multi-million-dollar deals, but chopping vegetables in a crowded shelter kitchen. "I can manage," he said, picking up the knife. Kinsley arched an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." Emma smirked before grabbing a clipboard. "I'll check on supplies. Try not to let him cut off a finger." Theo shot her a look, but she was already walking away. Kinsley handed him another bell pepper. "All right, Noah, let's see what you got." He hesitated, then started slicing. His cuts were slow, careful, too careful. Kinsley sighed. "You're overthinking it. The food needs to get out fast, not look pretty. Here." She took the knife from his hand and demonstrated. Swift, confident, efficient. Theo exhaled. "I guess I'm used to precision." She glanced at him. "That's so." He nodded, realizing too late that he was used to precision in ways she couldn't possibly understand. Contracts, presentations, corporate dealings. But here, this was a different kind of work, a different kind of survival. Kinsley handed the knife back. "Try again." This time he sped up. It wasn't perfect, but Kinsley nodded approvingly. "Better?" The kitchen was hot, the work repetitive, but Theo found himself lost in the rhythm. For the first time in years, no one expected him to lead. No one expected him to be Theo Aldridge. He was just Noah, a guy chopping vegetables in a shelter kitchen. An hour later, Emma returned, clipboard tucked under her arm. She stopped at the counter, watching him work. "Well," she said, tilting her head. "You didn't run off." Theo wiped his hands on a towel. "Was that a bet?" Kinsley snorted. "I gave him 10 minutes before he walked out." Theo raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Kinsley folded her arms. "You lasted longer than some, but we'll see how you handle serving time." Emma leaned against the counter. "Think you can handle the lunch rush?" He shrugged. "How bad can it be?" Kinsley and Emma exchanged a knowing glance. Theo quickly learned that it could be very bad. When the doors opened for lunch, the quiet hum of the morning turned into controlled chaos. A line formed fast, the air buzzing with conversations, some light-hearted, some tense. He was stationed at the serving counter, handing out plates of food. The line moved steadily, faces passing in quick succession. Some were grateful, offering quiet thank yous. Others didn't make eye contact at all, grabbing their plates and moving on without a word. "Keep it moving," Kinsley reminded him, sliding another tray of toast onto the counter. Theo adjusted, picking up speed. It wasn't just about handing out food. It was about seeing people. Some looked exhausted, others cautious, but each had a story written in the lines of their faces. Halfway through the shift, a voice cut through the noise. "This is what you're doing now." Theo glanced up. Ryan. He stood at the edge of the counter, arms crossed, looking at him like he was a puzzle missing too many pieces. Theo kept his expression neutral. "Something wrong with that?" Ryan scoffed. "You don't strike me as the volunteering type." Kinsley, who had been stacking plates, shot Ryan a warning glance. "You here to eat, or just to bother my workers?" Ryan ignored her, his gaze locked on Theo. "I just want to know what your deal is." Theo didn't blink. "No deal, just helping out." Ryan wasn't buying it. His skepticism ran deep, and Theo understood why. Out here, trust wasn't given freely. Emma appeared beside them, brows raised. "Ryan, is there a reason you're interrogating my staff?" Ryan turned to her. "You don't find it weird? He just shows up, and now he's part of the team." Emma's expression didn't change. "You don't have to trust him, but you do have to respect him." Ryan's jaw tightened. Theo could tell he wanted to say more. But with Emma standing there, waiting, he let out a quiet breath and shook his head. "You're cool," he muttered, stepping back. Theo watched as Ryan walked away, disappearing through the front doors. Emma turned to him. "You all right?" Theo nodded. "He doesn't trust easily, does he?" Emma exhaled. "Number." "And I don't blame him." She studied Theo for a moment. He could feel her trying to piece him together, just like her brother. Finally, she nodded toward the trays behind him. "Shift's not over yet. Think you can keep up?" Theo smirked. "Is that a challenge?" She grinned. "Call it motivation." Something unspoken passed between them, and for the first time since stepping into this world, Theo realized something. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was becoming part of it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shelter's worn linoleum floors. The lunch rush had ended, leaving behind only the hum of quiet conversations and the clatter of dishes being washed in the back. The air still carried the scent of buttered toast and scrambled eggs, though most of the food had been served hours ago. Theo stood by the counter, wiping down trays, his hands moving automatically as his mind replayed the interaction with Ryan. He had expected suspicion, maybe even hostility, but there was something about Ryan's distrust that stuck with him. It wasn't just skepticism, it was personal. "You survived your first shift." Emma's voice pulled him back. Theo glanced over to find her leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching him with that same quiet curiosity she always had. "Barely," he admitted. A small smile played at her lips. "Kinsley didn't scare you off?" She tried. Emma huffed a laugh, but there was something else in her eyes, something thoughtful. She was studying him. "You're different," she said after a beat. Theo set down the tray he had been holding. "How so?" Emma shrugged. "Most guys who show up here looking for work either avoid eye contact or never stop talking. You're somewhere in between." Theo smirked. "That's supposed to be a compliment." She tilted her head. "More of an observation." Theo exhaled, glancing at the shelter around them. "I guess I'm just trying to understand all of this." Emma studied him for a moment before nodding. "That's a better answer than most." Before he could respond, Kinsley poked her head into the room. "Emma, we're running low on coffee and sugar again." Emma sighed, rubbing her temple. "I just restocked last week." "Shelter's been fuller than usual," Kinsley said, "which means more coffee, more everything." Theo noticed the way Emma's jaw tightened. "I'll go," he said. Emma blinked. "Go where?" "To get the supplies." She arched an eyebrow. "You volunteering for grocery duty?" Theo shrugged. "Why not? I could use the fresh air." Emma hesitated. "You trust me with your coffee supply?" he added, smirking. That earned him a small laugh. "All right, but don't mess it up. There's a store 2 blocks over." She pulled a few bills from her pocket and handed them to him. Theo took them, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. This was a simple task, but it felt normal. For once, he wasn't the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He was just a guy running an errand. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, stretching his arms as the city buzzed around him. The shelter sat on the edge of the Tenderloin district, where San Francisco's wealth and struggle collided. A few streets over, high-rises and tech offices gleamed in the sun. But here, the reality was different. People sleeping on stoops, the scent of cheap takeout mixing with exhaust fumes, the distant echo of someone playing guitar for spare change. As he walked, he caught glimpses of his old life. A man in a navy suit stepped out of a coffee shop, checking his Rolex. A Tesla idled at a stoplight, music thumping faintly from inside. He could be in that car right now. He could be making calls, closing deals, living in the world that had defined him for so long. But instead, he was here. Buying coffee for a shelter, walking streets he had never bothered to notice before. A few minutes later, he stepped into the small grocery store. The bell above the door chimed and the familiar scent of stale bread and cheap detergent filled the air. He grabbed a basket and started collecting the items on the list. Sugar, coffee, some extra supplies Emma hadn't asked for but would probably need. As he moved toward the checkout, he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the bills Emma had given him. It wasn't enough. He hesitated. His instinct, his entire life, had been built around solving problems instantly. If something was short, he covered it. If a deal was shaky, he secured it. But he couldn't do that here, not without blowing his cover. "You need to put something back?" the cashier asked. Theo looked at the total again. "Yeah," he said finally, pulling out a small bag of protein bars. "I'll take these off." The cashier nodded, adjusting the total. As Theo handed over the money, something stirred in him. The idea of not having enough. The idea of having to choose. He took the bag and stepped back onto the sidewalk, the city feeling a little different now. When he returned to the shelter, Emma was sorting through donations in the back room. "You didn't get lost," she said, without looking up. Theo set the bag on the table. "Barely." She pulled out the supplies, nodding approvingly. "Not bad." Theo leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "How do you do it?" Emma glanced up. "Do what?" "All of this." He gestured around them. The shelter, the people, the constant struggle. She paused, setting down a can of soup. For the first time, she looked tired. "I don't know," she admitted. "Some days I don't think I can." Theo hadn't expected that answer. She let out a slow breath. "But then I remember why I started. My mum. She used to say that if you can change one person's day, just one, then it's worth it." Theo's chest tightened. "She sounds like she was a good person." Emma gave a small, sad smile. She was. The air between them shifted. Theo had spent years around the most powerful people in the city. People who could buy islands, fund startups with a phone call. But none of them had ever looked at him the way Emma did, like she was actually seeing him. Not Theo Aldridge, the CEO. Not Noah Allen, the drifter. Just him. Emma cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Anyway, thanks for the run. You passed the coffee test," Theo smirked. "High praise." She laughed softly, shaking her head before turning back to her work. Theo watched her for another second before stepping away. Something was changing, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The rain started just after sundown. A slow drizzle at first, then heavier, soaking the streets in a cold mist that clung to everything. Theo stood beneath the awning outside Golden Haven, hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie, watching the city blur behind a curtain of water. The streets were quieter now, the usual foot traffic reduced to a few stragglers hurrying for cover. Inside, the shelter had settled into its nighttime rhythm. People claimed their spots on worn-out cots, quiet murmurs filling the space as they wrapped themselves in thin blankets. The room smelled of damp clothes and stale coffee, but there was something else beneath it: safety. Emma moved through the space, checking in on people, her voice soft but firm. Theo watched the way she carried herself, steady, unshaken, even when exhaustion lined her features. "You just gonna stand there all night?" Theo turned to find Ollie leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, his usual smirk in place. "Thinking," Theo said. Ollie snorted. "Dangerous habit." Theo huffed a quiet laugh. "Guess I'm getting used to it." Ollie studied him for a moment, then nodded toward Emma. "She's got you spinning, huh?" Theo frowned. "What?" Ollie smirked. "Don't play dumb, rich boy. I see the way you look at her." Theo's stomach tightened. Was he that obvious? "It's not like that," he said quickly. Ollie chuckled. "Sure it isn't." Theo exhaled, leaning back against the wall. "She's different." "Yeah," Ollie said. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Theo didn't answer, because Ollie was right. Whatever was happening between him and Emma, this quiet pull, this growing awareness, it couldn't happen. Not when he was lying about who he was. Before he could say anything else, Emma stepped outside, rubbing her arms against the cold. Her hair was damp from the humidity, loose strands sticking to her face. "You two plotting something?" she asked. Ollie grinned. "Always." Emma shook her head, then turned to Theo. "You're not sleeping inside?" Theo hesitated. "Figured I'd stay out here for a while." Emma studied him, then nodded toward the street. "Come on." Theo blinked. "Where?" "You'll see." Ollie raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Emma shot him a look. "He's coming with me, not walking into a trap." Ollie shrugged. "If you say so." Theo followed Emma down the street, the rain easing to a light mist. They walked in silence at first, the city humming softly around them. "You ever been to the marina at night?" Emma asked. Theo shook his head. "It's quiet," she said. "Peaceful. When I was a kid, my mum used to take me there when things got bad. It was the only place that felt still." Theo glanced at her. "Things got bad." Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she exhaled, her breath visible in the cool air. "She worked 2 jobs, barely slept. We lost our apartment twice before she found something stable. I remember sitting in the car with her, watching the boats, pretending we were somewhere else." Theo felt a weight settle in his chest. He had never had to pretend. His world had always been tailored to his comfort. Never shaken, never uncertain. "She sounds like she was strong," he said. Emma nodded. She was. They reached the end of the block, stopping near an empty bench facing the water. The bay stretched out before them, the Golden Gate Bridge barely visible in the distance, its lights blinking through the mist. Theo shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. "Why'd you bring me here?" Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, finally she said, "Because I don't get you." Theo stiffened. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Most people who end up at the shelter, I can tell their stories in an instant. The ones who ran out of luck, the ones who ran out of time. But you," she shook her head, "you don't fit." Theo swallowed. "I don't know where you came from, or what you're running from," she continued, "but I know it's something." The weight in his chest grew heavier. He had spent years perfecting the art of deception. In boardrooms, at negotiations, in front of people who wanted something from him. But Emma wasn't like them. She wasn't trying to win. She was just trying to understand. For a second, he thought about telling her the truth. But the words lodged in his throat, heavy with consequences. So instead, he said, "Does it matter?" Emma studied him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It does." Theo held her gaze. He had never felt more exposed. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Emma turned just as Ryan approached, his expression unreadable. "I thought I'd find you here," he said. Emma frowned. "You were looking for me." Ryan's gaze flicked to Theo before settling back on her. "Something's up at the shelter. Kinsley needs you." Emma sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "Of course she does." She glanced at Theo. "You coming?" Theo hesitated. He wasn't ready to walk back into that shelter and face the unspoken questions that lingered in Emma's eyes. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll catch up." Emma gave him one last look before following Ryan back toward Golden Haven. Theo exhaled, turning his gaze back to the water. She saw too much, and if he wasn't careful, she was going to see everything. Theo sat on the bench long after Emma and Ryan had disappeared into the night. The bay stretched endlessly before him, the dark water rippling under the city's faint glow. The air was thick with salt and the lingering chill of the mist, but he barely felt it. Emma's words echoed in his mind. "I don't know where you came from, or what you're running from, but I know it's something." She was too close to the truth. He had spent years in rooms where people pretended to care, where every conversation had an agenda, every smile came with a hidden cost. But Emma, she wanted nothing from him. She was just trying to understand, and that made her dangerous. With a slow breath, he pushed himself up from the bench and started back toward Golden Haven. The streets had emptied out, the rain leaving behind glistening puddles that reflected the dim glow of streetlights. As he neared the shelter, voices filtered through the quiet. "I'm telling you, something about him isn't right." Theo stopped just outside the door. "Ryan. Ryan, enough." Emma's voice was firm, exhausted. "You don't have to like him, but you're not going to interrogate every new person who walks through these doors." Theo's jaw tightened. "I'm not interrogating. I'm looking out for you," Ryan shot back. "You don't even know where this guy came from. He barely talks about his past. He won't even say what he did before this, because maybe it doesn't matter." There was a beat of silence. Theo could feel Ryan's frustration, the weight of it pressing into the walls. "You really believe that?" Ryan's voice was lower now, measured. Emma let out a slow breath. "I believe that not everyone has to prove themselves to you." Theo stepped inside before he could hear any more. The main room of the shelter was quieter now. A few people sat hunched over their cots. Others quietly spoke in corners. Kinsley stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, watching Emma and Ryan with the kind of patience that came from years of watching the same arguments play out. Ryan caught sight of Theo first. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Emma turned next, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Everything all right?" Theo asked, keeping his voice light. Emma nodded. "Just shelter business." Ryan scoffed under his breath and walked past him, brushing his shoulder slightly as he left. Theo watched him go, feeling the tension settle between them like an unspoken challenge. Kinsley let out a low sigh. "That boy needs to learn when to quit." Emma shook her head. "He means well." "Yeah." Kinsley arched a brow. "Well, so did my third husband, and he was a nightmare." Emma smirked, rubbing her temple. "I don't want to know, do I?" Kinsley grinned. Absolutely not." Theo watched their exchange, something warm tugging at the corner of his chest. It was so different from his world. His conversations with his father were measured, cold, strategic. Even with Zoe, every interaction had been a game, figuring out what was said versus what was meant. But here, everything was real. "You look like your brain's working too hard," Kinsley said, nudging him slightly. Theo smirked, just taking it all in. "Well, don't take too long. If you're hanging around, you're going to be useful. Come on." He followed her into the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. The warmth of the ovens filled the space, the scent of baking bread somehow grounding in a way he hadn't expected. Emma leaned against the counter, watching him with a quiet expression. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know," she said. Theo paused, looking at her. "Doing what?" Emma shrugged. "Sticking around." For a second, he didn't know how to answer. He could have walked away days ago. He could have taken what he needed from this experience and returned to his world. A world where no one questioned who he was, where he belonged. And yet, he wasn't leaving. Something about that terrified him. He leaned against the counter beside her. "Maybe I don't want to leave." Emma studied him for a long moment. "You're not like the others who come through here," she finally said. Theo tensed. "And what kind of person do you think I am?" Emma's lips pressed together. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm trying to figure it out." And that was the problem, because if she kept looking, she was going to find the truth. And once she did, everything would fall apart. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air as the first hints of morning light crept through the shelter's windows. Theo stood at the sink, rinsing off the last few plates from breakfast. The hum of quiet conversation filled the room. People coming and going, faces familiar now. People he had once looked past, now a part of his everyday life. A part of a world he was beginning to understand. He wasn't sure how that made him feel. Lost in thought again? Emma's voice pulled him back. Theo turned to find her leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching him with a small smirk. "Just thinking," he said. Emma huffed. "Dangerous habit?" Theo chuckled, shaking his head as he set the plate down. "So I've been told." Emma studied him for a beat, her expression unreadable. "You've been here longer than most." Theo nodded. "Yeah." "I keep waiting for you to disappear," she admitted. Theo swallowed. So did he. "I'm still here," he said instead. Emma tilted her head slightly. "For now." A beat of silence stretched between them. Theo knew she wasn't accusing him of anything. Not yet. But there was a quiet challenge in her voice, a pull at the edges of something neither of them had spoken out loud. She was trying to figure him out, and the longer he stayed, the harder it was becoming to keep the truth buried. Before either of them could say anything else, the front door opened, bringing in a sharp gust of cool air. Theo turned, expecting to see another regular, someone in need of a meal, a cot. Instead, it was Zoe. His stomach tightened. She stood just inside the doorway, her polished boots clicking against the floor, a silk scarf looped effortlessly around her neck. She was out of place here, too poised, too deliberate. Her eyes scanned the room before landing on him. "Theo." Emma stiffened beside him. Theo forced a slow breath. "It's Noah," he corrected, keeping his voice even. Zoe smiled, slow, knowing. "Is it?" Emma's gaze flicked between them, her brows pulling together. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Zoe said, stepping closer. "I was just in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in." Theo's hands curled into fists. She was playing a game. "You don't belong here," he said quietly. Zoe arched a brow. "Neither do you." Emma's gaze sharpened, her arms folding across her chest. "How do you know each other?" Theo swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "We have history." Zoe let out a soft laugh. That's one way to put it. Emma didn't look away from Theo, waiting, expecting. Zoe took another step forward, her eyes glinting with amusement. "You can keep pretending, Theo, or you can tell her the truth." Emma's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for Theo to feel it. The first crack. Theo's chest tightened. "What do you want, Zoe?" Zoe sighed dramatically. "I just wanted to see how long you planned on playing this little game." Emma's jaw tensed. "Game?" Zoe turned to her, smiling sweetly. "Did he tell you why he's really here?" Theo stepped in before she could say more. "That's enough," Zoe smirked. "It's never enough with you." A beat of silence. Then she adjusted her scarf, giving him one last look before turning toward the door. "See you soon," she said over her shoulder before slipping outside. The second the door clicked shut, Theo felt the weight of Emma's stare. Slowly, he turned back to her. Emma's expression was unreadable. "Who are you?" Theo's heart pounded. "What are you hiding?" she asked, quieter this time. He didn't have an answer. For the first time, he was truly out of time. The silence between them felt heavier than anything Theo had carried in his life. Emma stood in front of him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But her eyes were sharp, questioning, suspicious. She wasn't angry, not yet. But anger wasn't the problem. Doubt was. Theo forced himself to stay still, to keep his breathing steady, even as every instinct screamed at him to find the right words, to fix this before the cracks in his lie turned into something irreparable. "Emma, who are you?" she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. Theo clenched his jaw. "I told you, my name is Noah." Emma's gaze didn't waver. "That woman didn't call you Noah." Theo swallowed. "She's—" He exhaled, forcing his voice to stay controlled. "She's from my past, and she's trying to mess with me." Emma's expression remained unreadable. "And what past is that?" Theo hesitated, just long enough for Emma's eyes to flicker with something cold. Doubt. She took a slow step back, and that hurt more than if she had yelled. "I don't lie to people, Noah," she said, her voice measured. "I don't have time for it." Theo's chest tightened. He knew what she was doing. She was giving him a chance. One chance to tell her the truth. And he couldn't. So he said nothing. Emma let out a slow breath, her shoulders dropping slightly, like she had just made a decision. She turned without another word and walked toward the back of the shelter. Theo stood there, frozen, feeling something slip through his fingers that he hadn't even realized he was holding on to. He had spent his entire life making calculated decisions. Every choice had been precise, every word planned. But this was the first time he had no idea what to do next. A chair scraped across the floor behind him. "Hell of a mess you've made," Kinsley said, watching him from her usual spot near the kitchen. Theo exhaled. "You don't even know what's going on." Kinsley tilted her head. "Don't need to. I know that look in Emma's eyes. It's the same one I had when my first husband told me he wasn't gambling anymore." Theo ran a hand down his face. "It's not like that." Kinsley arched an eyebrow. "Oh, so you aren't lying to her?" Theo hesitated. Kinsley huffed. "That's what I thought." She stood, grabbing her cup of coffee. "People don't get second chances with Emma. She spent too many years cleaning up after people's broken promises. You better figure out what you're doing before she decides you're not worth the time." Then she walked off, leaving Theo standing there, feeling like the ground beneath him had shifted. He needed to fix this. But the problem was, he wasn't sure if telling the truth would fix anything, or just make everything worse. By the time Theo stepped outside, the sky had darkened, the city humming with late-night life. He walked without direction, trying to clear his mind, but the weight of Emma's doubt followed him with every step. How had this gotten so complicated? He had meant to stay distant, meant to observe, to understand what life was like for people who didn't have his wealth, his privileges. But Emma wasn't part of the plan. She wasn't supposed to matter. And now she was the only thing that did. A familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Deep in contemplation, are we?" Theo stopped. Zoe stood near a street lamp, her arms folded, watching him like a cat that had cornered its prey. He clenched his jaw. "What do you want, Zoe?" Zoe smirked. "I think the better question is, what do you want?" Theo exhaled sharply. "Not this. Not you here, screwing everything up." Zoe took a step closer. "Oh, come on. I barely said anything." Theo gave her a sharp look. "You said enough." Zoe tilted her head. "I find it fascinating, you know. you disappear, go on this little experiment of yours, and now suddenly you care about whether a shelter worker trusts you? Theo's fist curled. Emma is more than that. Zoe's smirk deepened. Oh, I know. That's why this is so fun. Theo forced himself to breathe. Leave her alone. Zoe leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. I don't have to do anything, Theo. You'll destroy this all on your own. Then she stepped back, adjusting her scarf. I'll see you soon. And just like that, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Theo stood there, the city pressing in around him. Zoe was right about one thing. If he didn't figure out a way to fix this, he would lose everything. Theo hadn't planned on returning to the shelter that night. After his conversation with Zoe, after the slow sinking realization that his time was running out, he had walked for hours. The city moved around him, cars speeding past, people laughing in restaurants, bright lights flashing on billboards advertising things he used to care about. Now, none of it mattered. But as the night deepened and the streets emptied, his feet carried him back. Golden Haven stood quiet against the backdrop of the city. The usual hum of conversation had died down. The warm glow of the common room dimmed for the night. Theo hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. Would Emma even want him here? The thought unsettled him more than he expected. He pushed the door open. Inside, the shelter was still. A few people stirred on their cots, muffled voices drifting from a back corner. The scent of old coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the faintest trace of something floral. Emma's shampoo, maybe. He found her at the far end of the room, sitting at a small table, a stack of papers in front of her. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders, her fingers drumming lightly against the tabletop as she stared at the documents in front of her. She hadn't noticed him yet. For a brief moment, he considered turning around, walking away, giving her the space she probably wanted. But then, as if sensing him, Emma looked up. Her gaze met his, and for a split second, something flickered there, something unreadable. Then her expression hardened, and she straightened. You're back, she said. Theo nodded. Yeah. A pause. He took a cautious step forward. Can we talk? Emma sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't know, Theo. Can we? Hearing his real name from her lips hit harder than it should have. He sat down across from her, hands clasped together on the table. I wanted to explain. Emma arched a brow. You mean, lie better? Theo exhaled. That's not fair. Emma scoffed. You know what's not fair? Spending weeks getting to know someone, trusting them, believing them, only to find out it was all a performance. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. That was worse. Anger meant there was still something to fight for. This question mark. This was disappointment. Theo swallowed hard. Emma, I didn't plan for this to happen. When I came here, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She folded her arms. So why are you here, Theo? And don't give me some vague answer about figuring things out. I deserve the truth. The truth. The words were there, right there, but saying them, that meant losing her for good. I can't, he said, finally, voice barely above a whisper. Emma's jaw tightened. Then we're done here. She started to stand, but Theo reached out instinctively. Fingers brushing against her wrist, she froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she slowly pulled her arm away. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet. Tired. I don't do half-truths, Theo. Not in this place. Not with these people. If you want to be here, you have to be honest. Otherwise... She let the words trail off, but Theo understood the meaning. Otherwise, he had no place here. She didn't wait for his response. She grabbed the papers off the table and walked away, disappearing down the hallway without looking back. Theo sat there, staring at the empty space where she had been. His hands curled into fists. He was losing her. And the worst part, it was his own fault. The world outside the shelter felt different, colder, not in temperature, but in weight. Theo sat on the curb just beyond Golden Haven's entrance, elbows on his knees, staring at the pavement like it held the answers to everything he had just lost. The streets were quiet at this hour, the city humming in the background like it didn't care that everything had changed. Emma was gone. Not physically. He knew she was inside, somewhere behind those walls, but the way she had looked at him, the way she had pulled away, that was the kind of distance you couldn't close. He rubbed his face, exhaling slowly, trying to think, trying to breathe past the weight of his own mistakes. You look like a guy who just realized he screwed up his whole life. Theo turned to find Ollie standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching him with that same sharp-eyed gaze that made it impossible to lie. Theo let out a humorless chuckle. That obvious? Ollie shrugged. Only to people who've been there. Theo looked away. The thing about Ollie was that he didn't talk much, but when he did, he saw right through you. She's done with me, Theo admitted, his voice quieter than he wanted it to be. Ollie didn't move, just studied him for a moment. Because of that woman earlier? Theo nodded. Ollie let out a slow breath. You going to tell me what's actually going on? Theo hesitated. He had never told anyone. Not the full truth. Not the whole picture. But maybe he owed someone the truth. I'm not who she thinks I am, Theo admitted. Ollie smirked. Well, no kidding. Theo exhaled, looking up at the sky, the city lights casting an artificial glow against the low clouds. I came here because I wanted to see if any of this was real. If people were real. If anyone cared without knowing who I was. Ollie's smirk faded slightly. And? Theo swallowed hard. And I found someone who does. But I ruined it before it even started. Ollie let out a low hum, like he was turning the words over in his head. So let me get this straight. You came here looking for something real, but you never gave her anything real in return. Theo flinched at the truth of it. Ollie shook his head. Man, you really are rich. Theo frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means you came down here playing pretend, thinking you were going to have some grand revelation about the world. But the difference between you and the rest of us? Ollie's gaze darkened. We don't have the luxury of pretending. Theo's stomach twisted. Ollie let out a sigh. Look, I get it. You wanted something different, but you can't build something real on a lie. And that girl, she's as real as it gets. Theo looked down at his hands. I don't know if I can fix it, he admitted. Ollie nodded. Maybe not, but I know one thing for sure. Theo met his gaze. If you walk away now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Theo's breath caught in his throat. Because for the first time in his life, he believed that. And suddenly, standing still wasn't an option. He pushed himself up, his heartbeat thrumming with something new. Not panic, not fear, determination. Ollie smirked. That's more like it. Theo didn't respond. He was already moving. Inside, the shelter was dimly lit, most of the people asleep. The late-night hum settled into a quiet murmur. He scanned the room, his pulse quickening when he saw her. Emma. She was sitting at one of the tables near the back, sorting through paperwork, her expression tight with exhaustion. He took a steady breath and walked toward her. She didn't look up when he reached her. I'm not in the mood, Theo. He swallowed hard. Then just listen. She stiffened, her fingers pausing on the page in front of her, but she didn't stop him. Theo sat across from her, hands pressed together, grounding himself. I lied, he said, his voice steady. I lied about who I was, and I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm going to tell you the truth anyway, because you're right. You deserve that. Emma finally looked up, her expression unreadable. Theo exhaled. My real name is Theo Aldridge. I own a real estate and tech investment firm. My father is Richard Aldridge, and I grew up in a world where money solves everything. Emma didn't blink. Theo continued. I came here because I wanted to know if people would see me. Not the name, not the money, just me. Emma's jaw tightened, but she still said nothing. Theo leaned forward slightly, his voice softer. And then I met you. Her eyes flickered, but she stayed silent. I didn't expect you, Emma. His throat felt tight. I didn't expect to care about you, but I do, and I know I ruined whatever trust you had in me. But I swear to you, I have never been more honest than I am right now. Emma's fingers curled around the edges of the papers in front of her. Seconds stretched between them. Finally, she spoke. You expect me to just believe you now? Theo exhaled. Number. But I hope you will. Emma let out a slow breath. You lied to me, Theo. To all of us. I know. His voice was quiet. And I can't change that. But I can promise you that everything else, everything between us, was real. Emma looked away, shaking her head. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted, her voice almost too soft to hear. Theo's heart ached at the hesitation in her tone. I'll wait, he said. Emma's eyes flicked back to his. For what? For as long as it takes for you to believe me again. Something in her gaze cracked. Just slightly. And in that moment, Theo knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. Emma didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at him, her expression caught between exhaustion and disbelief. Theo could feel the weight of it, the slow unraveling of trust, the sharp edge of betrayal. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Something she wasn't ready to admit yet. You'll wait, she repeated, her voice quiet. Theo nodded. As long as it takes. Emma exhaled, leaning back in her chair, pressing her fingers against her temples like she was trying to push away a headache. You make it sound simple. It's not, Theo admitted, but it's the only thing I know to do. Emma let out a soft, bitter laugh. I don't even know who you are, Theo. He swallowed. You do. Her eyes snapped to his, sharp, unforgiving. Do I? Theo hesitated. Then, instead of answering, he leaned forward, voice steady. When I met you, I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought I was here to prove something to myself, to my father. But then I started working here, and I saw how much this place means to you, to Kinsley, to Ryan, to everyone who walks through those doors, and I realized I wasn't proving anything. I was learning. Emma's fingers curled into fists, but she didn't look away. Theo's voice softened. And then I met you. A flicker of something crossed her face, something she tried to hide. You saw me when no one else did, Theo continued, his voice thick. Not because of my name, not because of my money, just me, and I've never had that before. Emma exhaled sharply, shaking her head. That's not fair. Theo swallowed hard. I know. Silence stretched between them. The shelter was quieter now, the hum of the city outside barely filtering through the walls. Somewhere in the back, Kinsley's radio played faintly, a soft, crackling melody that neither of them really heard. Emma let out a slow breath. So what now? You expect me to just pretend like none of this happened? No, Theo said. I expect you to be mad at me. I expect you to not trust me. But I also hope that one day you will. Emma looked away, biting her lip. I don't know if I can. Theo felt something inside him tighten, but then, after a long moment, she let out a slow breath. But I don't know if I can just walk away either. Theo's chest ached. Then don't. Emma blinked, her lips parting slightly. Theo held her gaze. I don't want to leave. Not just because of you, because of this place, because of what I've learned here. Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually part of something. Emma shook her head, like she wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. "Let me prove it to you," Theo said quietly. She exhaled, rubbing her hands over her face. "You don't get it, Theo. This isn't about whether I want to believe you. It's about whether I can." Theo swallowed. "Then let me show you that you can." Emma stared at him for a long moment, then finally stood. Theo's heart pounded. She didn't leave. She just stood there, looking down at him like she was seeing him for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, she was. The next few days at Golden Haven were different. Emma didn't avoid him, but she didn't seek him out either. She was there, always moving, always working, sorting donations, organizing schedules, checking in on the people who needed her, but something had shifted. The way she looked at him, the way her eyes hesitated on his, like she was relearning how to see him. Theo didn't push. He showed up. Every morning, before the sun fully rose over the city, he was in the kitchen with Kinsley, chopping vegetables, making coffee, serving plates. He cleaned tables, stacked chairs, listened to the people who had real problems, problems he had never understood before. He didn't ask Emma for anything, because she had already given him too much. She had given him a reason to stay. On the third morning, she spoke to him first. "We need more volunteers," she said, setting down a clipboard in front of him. Theo glanced up from the stack of dishes he was drying. "Okay." She crossed her arms. "The city pulled some of our funding last week. That means fewer supplies, fewer resources. And with winter coming, we can't afford that." Theo set the towel down. "How do we fix it?" Emma studied him for a second. Then, for the first time in days, she let him in. "I'm organizing a fundraiser," she admitted. "I was going to wait until next month, but if we don't start now, we won't make it in time." Theo straightened. "What do you need?" Emma hesitated. "You don't have to—" "I want to," Theo interrupted. She exhaled. "We need donors, sponsors, people who actually care about this place." Theo nodded slowly. "All right." Emma arched a brow. "Just like that?" Theo offered a small smile. "Just like that." Emma looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Fine. But don't screw it up," Theo smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." That afternoon he left the shelter for the first time in weeks, as Theo Aldridge. His suit felt heavier than it used to. The familiar sleekness of his car, the cold efficiency of his office, it all felt distant now, like a world he had walked away from. But this was something he could do. He owed it to her. By the end of the day, he had secured 2 corporate sponsorships. By the end of the week, he had a full event plan, a silent auction, a private dinner, a donor list that would have taken Emma months to build. And when he walked back into Golden Haven that evening, handing her the final list, she just stared at him. "You actually did it." Theo smirked. "You sound surprised." Emma shook her head, flipping through the papers. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Theo said. "Let's do this." Emma looked up at him, and for the first time since everything fell apart, she smiled. Just a little. Just enough. But it was enough. The night of the fundraiser arrived faster than Theo expected. Golden Haven had never looked like this before. The usually worn-down community center had been transformed. String lights hanging across the ceiling, white linen tablecloths covering the long folding tables, a small jazz trio playing softly in the corner. The scent of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread filled the air, replacing the usual canned soup and instant coffee. Theo stood near the entrance, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. He had spent the last week pulling every string he had, securing vendors, calling in favors, making sure that tonight mattered. Because this wasn't just about raising money. It was about proving something. To Emma, to himself. "You look like you might throw up." Theo turned to see Ollie standing next to him, looking around the room with mild interest. He had ditched his usual worn-out hoodie for a dark button-down, but he still had the same sharp-eyed, unimpressed expression. Theo smirked. "You clean up well." Ollie snorted. "Yeah, well, I figured if rich people were paying for dinner, I might as well look the part." Theo glanced at the crowd forming. Businessmen, philanthropists, investors, his world and Emma's, colliding in a way that still didn't feel real. "She's going to be impressed, you know," Ollie added. Theo tensed. "You think so?" Ollie gave him a dry look. "You pulled this off in less than 2 weeks. Even if she doesn't say it, she knows you did this for her." Theo exhaled. That was the problem. Because this wasn't just about fixing the shelter's funding. It was about fixing what he had broken. And he still wasn't sure if that was possible. Before he could respond, the doors opened again and everything else disappeared. Emma stepped inside, scanning the room, her expression caught between awe and uncertainty. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, but somehow she looked like she belonged in a way no one else did. Theo swallowed hard. Ollie nudged him. "Go." Theo hesitated for only a second before moving. Emma turned just as he reached her. "You did all this," she said, her voice quiet. Theo searched her expression, looking for hesitation, doubt, any sign that she still didn't trust him. But she wasn't questioning him. She was just seeing him. Theo exhaled. "We did." Emma blinked, her lips pressing together, her fingers tightening around the clutch in her hands. Then, finally, she said, "Thank you." Theo felt something loosen in his chest. A small step, but a step. Before either of them could say anything else, Ryan appeared at Emma's side, his gaze flicking between them. "If this is a scam, I swear—" "Ryan," Emma warned, but her brother didn't budge. Theo met his stare head-on. "It's not." Ryan studied him for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. "It better not be." Emma sighed, rubbing her temple. "Can we just get through tonight without any threats?" Ryan grumbled something under his breath, but backed off. Emma turned back to Theo, something almost amused in her eyes. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Theo smirked. "Not even a little." Emma smiled, a real one, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Theo let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance. The night of the fundraiser was a success. Donations flooded in, more than Emma had hoped for. The shelter would be safe for the next year, maybe longer, with enough funding to expand resources and help more people get back on their feet. But Theo wasn't thinking about the money. Not as he stood near the doors of Golden Haven, watching the last of the guests trickle out into the night, their expensive cars pulling away from the curb. The jazz music had stopped, the tables were mostly cleared, and the warmth of the event was already fading into something quieter, more intimate. Emma was still inside, talking to Kinsley near the kitchen. Her voice was softer now, her posture looser. She was exhausted. But there was something else, too. Something like relief. Theo wanted to go to her. He wanted to tell her that this wasn't about proving himself anymore. That it had never really been about that. It was about her. And maybe, just maybe, she already knew. He didn't get the chance to find out before Richard Aldridge walked through the front doors. Theo stiffened instantly, his heart pounding. His father looked out of place here, in his tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding as ever. He wasn't here to blend in. He was here because he wanted something. Theo already knew what. Richard scanned the room before his gaze landed on his son. His expression didn't shift, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Theo's stomach twist. Disappointment. "You've been busy," Richard said smoothly, stepping closer. Theo forced himself to breathe. "What are you doing here?" Richard's lips curled slightly. Aldrich Ventures has its ways of keeping tabs on where its CEO spends his time. Theo clenched his jaw. I don't work for you anymore. Richard arched a brow. Don't you? Theo held his ground. His father let out a quiet sigh, glancing around. This is quite the spectacle. It's not a spectacle, Theo corrected. It's a necessity. Richard hummed. You really believe that? Theo's hands curled into fists. Yes. Richard studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. You've always been brilliant, Theo, but you're wasting yourself here. Theo exhaled sharply. No, I'm finally doing something that matters. Richard's gaze darkened. This isn't where you belong. Theo's pulse pounded in his ears, but before he could answer, Emma's voice cut through the air. You don't get to decide that. Theo turned to see her standing a few feet away. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but her voice was steady. Richard looked at her, as if truly seeing her for the first time. You must be Emma. She nodded. Richard took a slow step forward. I assume my son hasn't told you the full extent of what he walked away from. Emma didn't blink. I don't care about his money. Richard let out a low chuckle. Everyone says that until they realize what they're missing. Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't waver. What he walked away from doesn't matter. What he's choosing now does. Theo's chest tightened. Richard exhaled, turning back to his son. You're making a mistake. Theo swallowed, then shook his head. Number I already did. His father narrowed his eyes slightly, but Theo didn't let him speak. I spent my whole life trying to be the person you expected me to be, Theo said. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. But it's not. I need more than deals and acquisitions. I need more than just winning. Richard was silent. Theo took a slow breath. I need something real, he finished. Richard's expression remained unreadable for a moment. Then, finally, he sighed. I see. There was no anger in his tone, no disappointment, just acceptance. Theo hadn't expected that. Richard gave him one last look, then turned toward the door. He paused just before stepping outside. You should know, the board won't wait forever. If you walk away for good. Theo didn't hesitate. I already have. Richard nodded once, then stepped into the night, disappearing into the city. The moment the door shut behind him, Theo felt like he could finally breathe. Emma let out a slow exhale beside him. Well, she said, that was dramatic. Theo let out a breathless laugh. You're telling me? She studied him for a second, her expression softer now. Are you okay? Theo met her gaze. Yeah, I think I am. Emma nodded, then looked around at the nearly empty shelter. This place still needs a lot of work, she murmured. Theo smiled. Then let's get to work. Emma's lips twitched slightly, like she was trying not to smile back. And then, after a long moment, she reached out, just barely brushing her fingers against his. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Because for the first time in his life, Theo was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning after the fundraiser, Golden Haven felt different. It wasn't just the success of the event or the influx of donations. It was the energy in the air, a kind of cautious hope, the kind that only came when something you'd been fighting for finally felt possible. Theo stood by the kitchen counter, rolling up his sleeves as he helped Kinsley stack clean plates. The shelter was quieter than usual, most of the residents still sleeping in after the long night. The hum of the coffee machine filled the space, the rich aroma mixing with the crisp morning air drifting through the open windows. You're still here, Kinsley observed, sliding a mug across the counter towards him. Theo smirked. You sound surprised. Kinsley took a slow sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim. Figured you'd have packed up your tailored suits and disappeared back into the world of power lunches and expensive scotch by now. Theo let out a quiet chuckle. Tempting, but no. Kinsley arched a brow. So, what's keeping you here then? Theo didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he wasn't sure. At first, it had been about proving something, that he could strip himself of his name, his privilege, his carefully crafted image, and still find meaning. But now it wasn't about him at all. It was about Emma, about this place, about the way his life had become less about deals and more about people. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the quiet. We have a problem. Theo turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her expression tight. Kinsley sighed. Don't we always? Emma ignored the comment, stepping forward and placing a stack of papers on the counter. The city's sending an inspection team next week. Theo frowned. Inspection? Emma exhaled, rubbing her temples. They're reviewing all shelters in the district. New regulations. If we don't meet every requirement, we could lose our operating license. Theo's stomach tightened. And do we? Emma hesitated. That was all the answer he needed. Kinsley sighed, flipping through the paperwork. Let me guess, some nonsense about safety codes, financial documentation, and proper infrastructure? Emma nodded. We need to submit everything by Friday. If we don't, we'll be flagged. And once we're flagged... Theo finished the thought for her. It's a slow death. They'll bury you in paperwork until the shelter can't function anymore. Emma swallowed hard, her frustration clear. Theo looked at the documents again. This was his world, the one he had spent years navigating. And now, it was being used against something he cared about. He set his coffee down. Then we fix it. Emma's brows lifted slightly. Fix it? Theo nodded. We make sure every document is spotless. We meet every requirement before they even have a chance to question us. Emma let out a humorless laugh. That sounds great in theory, but do you have any idea how much work that is? Theo smirked. Emma, you're talking to a guy who's orchestrated billion-dollar mergers over a single weekend. Trust me, we can do this. She studied him, skepticism flickering across her face. Kinsley leaned against the counter, watching the exchange with interest. You two are cute when you pretend not to trust each other. Emma shot her a look. Not the time, Kinsley. Kinsley grinned. Sure. I'll go dig up the older records. You two keep up the bickering. Strategizing. She disappeared down the hall, leaving Theo and Emma standing in the quiet kitchen. Theo crossed his arms. So, are we doing this or not? Emma let out a slow breath, her eyes searching his. Then, finally, she nodded. Yeah, we're doing this. Theo smiled. Good, because I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Emma looked away, but not before he caught the small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. And just like that, they had a new fight ahead of them. And this time, they were fighting together. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, late nights, and endless cups of coffee. Golden Haven had always been about survival, about making do with what they had. But now, they had to be perfect. The inspection wasn't just routine. It was an opportunity for the city to shut them down under the weight of bureaucracy. Theo knew how this worked. He had been on the other side of it, and now he was doing everything in his power to make sure Emma didn't lose the place she had built. By the third night, the common room had transformed into their war room. Papers were spread across every table, financial statements, maintenance reports, donation receipts, all of it needing to be checked, fixed, flawless. Theo sat at one end of the table, scanning spreadsheets on his laptop, while Emma flipped through old records, her pen tapping absently against her knee. This is insane, she muttered, rubbing her temples. I knew the city was strict, but this feels like they're setting us up to fail. They are, Theo said simply. Emma exhaled sharply, leaning back in her chair. How is that even legal? Theo glanced up, smirking. It's not. It's just the kind of legal no one bothers to fight, Emma huffed. That's comforting. Theo set his laptop aside. Hey. She looked at him. You're doing everything right, he said, voice steady. They're not going to shut you down. Emma let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You say that like you can guarantee it. Theo leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. I can. Emma searched his face, something uncertain flickering in her expression. How? Theo exhaled. Because I know how they think. I know what they're looking for, and I know how to make sure they don't find it. You focus on keeping this place running. I'll handle them. Emma studied him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Theo felt something settle in his chest. Trust. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The morning of the inspection arrived with a crisp bite in the air. Theo had barely slept. He had spent the night double-checking every document, making sure every regulation was met, that there were no loose ends for the city to use against them. Now, as he stood near the front entrance, watching the inspectors step out of their city-issued SUV, he felt the weight of all of it. Emma stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her face unreadable. Ryan was on her other side, tense and unmoving. You ready for this? Theo asked quietly. Emma didn't look at him. Number. But that's never stopped me before. Theo smiled slightly. Good. The lead inspector, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a clipboard, approached with a practiced, indifferent smile. Miss Brooks? Emma nodded. That's me. I'm Greg Lawson, head of the city's Shelter Compliance Division. We'll try to make this as smooth as possible. Theo almost laughed. That was a lie. The goal wasn't to make it smooth. The goal was to find problems, to pick them apart until Golden Haven became too much trouble to keep open. Let's begin, Lawson said, stepping past them. And just like that, the fight for Golden Haven had begun. The inspection was brutal. The inspectors moved through every inch of the shelter, pointing out minor infractions, taking notes on anything that could be used against them. A chipped countertop in the kitchen, a storage closet that wasn't up to code. Theo stayed close, answering every question before Emma even had the chance. You'll find that the electrical system was updated last year, he said smoothly when one inspector frowned at a fuse box. Our recent fundraiser covered the cost of infrastructure improvements, he added when another inspector questioned finances. For every attempt to break Golden Haven down, Theo was there with a solution. Emma barely said a word. She just watched him. And when the inspection was finally over, when Lawson stood at the entrance flipping through his notes, the tension in the air was unbearable. We'll be reviewing everything in our final report, Lawson said. Expect to hear from us within the week. Emma nodded. Thank you. Lawson looked at her, then at Theodore. Then, without another word, he and his team left. The second the door shut behind them, Emma let out a breath and sank onto the nearest chair. Ryan dragged a hand through his hair. That was awful. Theo smirked. Could have been worse. Ryan shot him a glare. Yeah, how? They could have shut you down on the spot. Ryan rolled his eyes, but Emma just stared at Theo. You knew exactly what they were doing, she said. Theo nodded. Yeah. You played them, she said, quieter this time. Theo didn't respond right away. Then, finally, he said, I leveled the playing field. Emma swallowed. I don't know whether to thank you or be terrified. Theo grinned. You can do both. Emma exhaled a soft laugh, shaking her head. We still don't know what they're going to decide. We'll win, Theo said, voice steady. Emma held his gaze. You're that sure? Theo nodded. And for the first time since he had arrived at Golden Haven, he wasn't just saying it for her. He was saying it because he believed it.